I'm going to jump right in here with the subject of art and faith. It's very complicated, and in fact, I'm going to do this one in two parts. Let me say right here at the outset that I believe that all art represents mystery. The artwork is a framework within which we see certain objects, sensations, portrayal of certain actions. There might be motion involved or it might be static, but we recognize the furniture of the artwork because we're part of the culture in which it's created. And a lot of times, if in fact we're looking at an artwork from an alien culture, if we're too unfamiliar with the components of the work, we get really frustrated. But you know what? Just recognizing the furniture in the room is the very beginning of appreciating a work of art. It's not a matter of adding up the pieces and coming up with a sum, because the sum total of the work is greater than its components. What that work is doing is drawing your imagination into it so that you're noticing relationships between component parts and perhaps trying to complete certain suggested relationships. Shadow is a very powerful tool in the hands of a visual artist. This could be a painter or a filmmaker or a photographer. In some ways, the days of black and white filmmaking, I think, were much more artistic than our days today of flashy color and special effects. Shadow is always tempting you to enter into it and look for something that's hidden there. We find this even in nature. And I was talking about nature in a previous video. The most evocative natural scenes are often those that involve some kind of chasm or a forest at a certain time of day when there's a lot of shade or shadowing effect. And it's very teasing to our mind. We want to go into that picture, as it were, and fill out the spaces. I think this is even part of the, just to use a pop cultural kind of example, part of the magic to a child in a Christmas tree. You have the lights, and then you have the shadows that play in the limbs and the needles of the tree, and the child can behold this and just think of, the imagination can run wild. And I think for children, that particular holiday is an occasion to, it's a kind of a spiritual, and for adults, of course, it's a very spiritual experience too. Whenever you realize that, hey, there's something surrounding and infusing this material world that is composed by that world and it's suggested by that world, but it's not material, it's immaterial. This is what art is trying to do. It's trying to say with words that which cannot be put into words. It's trying to suggest with forms that which ultimately has no form. With sounds, that which exceeds, surpasses any possible association of sounds. Music, I so wish I knew more about music and could express myself with proper terminology, but great music, it seems to me, tends to create complex harmonies where the composer is walking a kind of tightrope. Just when you think that he's not going to be able to redeem this piece from disharmony, he ingeniously pulls it back, and your imagination is kind of being stretched back and forth like a rubber band. So you're constantly dealing in possibility, you're being challenged, and you're going into this work and completing it as you explore it. The idea of any sort of art depends very heavily on the involvement of the beholder, the perceiver. You can't have an artwork in isolation without also having the perceiver, because the nature of the work is to stimulate the perceiving mind, and the perceiver becomes part of the work. That's why it so frustrates me when I hear students, as a retired teacher of literature myself, I hate to hear students talk about how this or that high school teacher destroyed literature for them because they would take a test on the Scarlet Letter or Romeo and Juliet, or the Eve of St. Agnes, and this is what it means, and they didn't write the proper meaning down on the test, so they got a C minus. Well, you know, the meanings that the teacher's teaching are, sure, they're probably there largely justified by the facts of the text, but that's not where the text stops. It can't be, or it's not a very artistic text. The whole point of the work of art is to go beyond an enunciable meaning and to invite you farther in. That doesn't mean that a work of art means anything that you want it to mean. To go to this New Age reader response criticism, that's not the idea either. You can't take a bucket of paint, throw it on a canvas, and have a turtle crawl across it and oh, my imagination is just going wild with it. Well, okay, then I guess your house is full of inkblot tests. An inkblot test is not a work of art. There's not enough context. It doesn't have these familiar objects that we were talking about. The work of art takes the real world and it challenges us by, even as we engage reality, seeing something deeper in that reality than we know how to express. You see, this is its spiritual dimension. It makes us aware that we can write ever so many books about the meaning of a great Shakespeare play or a Joseph Conrad novel, and we still can't really get, Conrad's Kurtz in Heart of Darkness is a fascinating character. And as a writer myself, I think character and free will are the engine that moves the art of drama. Where's the harmony? Where's the shadow that makes a novel work? It's in the mystery of the human will. Mr. Kurtz was the most admired man in his European circle that anyone had ever known. He was a philanthropist. He goes off to Africa to convert the savage. And of course, Marlowe goes on that little steamer up the Congo River trying to bring Kurtz back. And what he finds is an ivory poacher, a gang leader, a murderer, a devil of a man. And everyone said this guy was the best of all men. What mystery turns the human will inside out in that fashion? Who would ever have expected that man to go in that direction? It's like the shadows in the chasm of the Grand Canyon, or like the colors playing off a cloud bank and during a sunset. Your imagination just wanders and wanders there and thinks that it's converging upon an understanding, but at the same time it realizes that it's never going to get to the bottom. I think it was Heraclitus who said originally that the soul is an abyss. When we have art before us and when we enjoy the experience of art, we understand that our human world, our material world, is more than it seems and more than we can ever express. Now, does that necessarily mean that God is the inexpressible? Well, yeah. I mean, it opens up a vast new space for something spiritual, but it doesn't necessarily take us to our specific God. And this is a frustration that I had several times when I've gone to conferences on Christian literature, and I've sat on panels where I had to MC presentations from writers who had written Christian novels. They were very insipid, I'm sorry to say. Not that they're not great Christian writers, but I didn't encounter many of them on these occasions. They were writing for a certain audience, and it seemed like there would be some kind of mess that the characters would get into, and then they go talk to their preacher, or they start reading their Bible, and they would find the key to turn to get out of their mess, and everything's all cleaned up and happy at the end. And but that's not art, you know. There's no shadow there. There's no indefinite quality. The definite, to go back to our Kantian terms, the defined area, the limitations, the units, the innumerable objects, the objects that we can enumerate is what I mean to say. The units within that work are bouncing off of each other and drawing us into a situation where a kind of indefinite exploration takes place, where we always feel that we're drawing closer and closer to the ultimate meaning, but we never really get to the destination. Well, if you write a work where the destination is reached, okay, everybody off into the line, you're there, this is what the Bible says here you should do in this situation, get it? Aren't you glad that you read this? And that's unfortunately just a kind of propaganda. I mean, you can have good propaganda, you can have morally uplifting propaganda, but not in a great work of art. A great work of art has to have that. This is its ultimately spiritual quality. It's not didactic, it's not teaching a specific lesson, it's loosening up the imagination to accept the reality of that which cannot be reduced, even though it's circulating through a world of definite objects, itself cannot be defined. It's not fully objective. Quickly, I'll show you something that I wrote, something that I painted to go with a novel that I wrote. This is one of the main characters. She's, as you can tell, kind of schizophrenic. I probably hit the symbolism there a little too hard with the light side of the moon and the dark side of the moon, and it's kind of reflected in her. Of course, she's got the hair over her eyes, which is often a suggestion that the person has low self-esteem, as this young girl does. The effort to infuse this painting with light and dark effects, and to use that really to symbolize that the soul is an abyss, that this is a very complicated young woman, was my aim.